Hi everyone, my name is Brett McPherson, and my project focused on invasive species management and biological control for aphids. So, throughout this presentation, I'll be going over the basic characteristics of aphids, why they are so difficult to control, the biological control agents, impacts of pesticides, impacts of climate change, challenges and implications for the future, and then possible solutions. So, some of you may know what an aphid is, but for those of you who don't, aphids are extremely invasive insects that occur in all parts of the world. There are over 4,000 species of aphids, and they have many different appearances. Adults can be winged or wingless and can range from light green to orange or red. Most species are no longer than a couple inches, and many of them can reproduce both sexually and asexually, meaning they have really rapid reproduction rates. Aphids feed on important crops like potatoes, cotton, wheat, maize, soybeans, lettuce, squash, and even more. They can be detrimental to agriculture if left without any form of control because they suck the sap from the plants, leaving them devoid of essential nutrients. Over 450 species of aphids feed on these economically important crops. Considering that wheat, rice, and corn are staple crops for about 4 billion people, aphids threaten food security worldwide. Not to mention, these tiny pests can transmit over 200 viruses to important crops, basically by injecting their saliva into a plant after previously feeding on another infected plant. Aphids are also able to easily adapt, and at least 14 known species are resistant to insecticides. And since pesticides require repeated spraying, aphids build resistance and outbreaks occur at an even larger scale after pesticide use. Aphids also have a symbiotic relationship with some species of ants. The ants are attracted to honeydew that is produced from the aphid when feeding, and in return, the ants provide the aphids with protection from predators. So, due to their resistivity to insecticides and protection from ants, aphids are a really difficult pest to kill. Yet large colonies of aphids rise above the economic threshold, which basically means their population level reaches the point where controlling the pest would result in economic gain, whereas no type of management would result in economic losses. This brings us to the use of biological control as a form of management for this invasive species. So, what is biological control? It is defined as the use of living organisms to control pests. This type of pest control has actually been around for a very long time, although it fell off after the widespread use of pesticides in 1940. The first instance of biocontrol for aphids was in 1734 when an entomologist suggested collecting aphivivorous fly eggs to put in greenhouses to control aphid populations. So, organisms that are purposefully used to control invasive species are called biocontrol agents, and usually consist of natural enemies of the pest. Natural enemies come in three forms: a parasitoid, a predator, or a pathogen. So, parasitoids are basically insects whose larvae are the parasite that lives inside the host before eventually killing them off. And in the aphid's case, this is usually a parasitoid wasp. They inject the eggs into the body of the aphid, and as you can see in this picture, the life cycle of a parasitoid. Parasitoids were found by multiple sources to have the highest success rate at 70% compared to the other natural enemies. As I previously stated, another group of natural enemies are predators. The predator most frequently referred to in the literature is the ladybug. This species was recognized very early on in 1200 AD as useful to reducing aphid populations. Nowadays, many introduction and translocation programs across the world have used ladybugs in an attempt to control aphid populations. Other predators noted in the literature are mainly winged insects, although there are some instances that note the use of predators such as spiders, centipedes, and mites, along with others. The last group of natural enemies are pathogens, which are microorganisms that can cause a disease. So in this case, fungi is the principal group of pathogens that affects aphids, yet they are harmless to beneficial species of animals and plants. Pathogens are different from parasitoids and predators because they can actually be produced in a test tube and developed for commercial use. So why is biological control becoming more popular as an alternative to other forms of pest control? Well, like I mentioned earlier, some species of aphids have developed a resistance to pesticides. Aphids have been frequently exposed to pesticides since its introduction in 1940. Not to mention, agriculture farmers have started to move away from pesticides as more studies have found major environmental and human health impacts related to the use of pesticides. Pesticide residue may be found on produce, in the soil, and even in our water supply. And pesticides have also been found to kill beneficial natural enemies, which only leads to the increase of aphid populations in agriculture. Yet, world pesticide expenditure reaches over $30 billion annually, even though they only temporarily relieve the problem and are impossible to target a specific species. Next, I will discuss how climate change impacts invasive species and their management. Climate change causes invasive species to undergo range expansion and may cause more widespread aphid outbreaks. Extreme weather events already have a huge impact on crops as extended drought and heavy precipitation impact crop yield. An increase in weather fluctuations due to climate change will also affect the relationship between aphids and their natural enemies. Most sources agree that overall, global warming has a negative effect on crops through a rise of pest insect activity. This is because rising CO2 levels can increase developmental and metabolic rates of invasive species, meaning that aphids will have boosted appetites and will have more generations within that reproductive stage. And like I said earlier, climate change causes range expansion, meaning aphids are moving poleward from the tropics to more temperate regions. And consequently, temperate regions are where we grow most of our world's agriculture crops, like cotton and wheat. The increasing loss of crops due to climate change only proves that implementing and maintaining biological control programs is important to control pest outbreaks. Luckily, in some cases, weather fluctuations may improve a biocontrol agent's ability to reduce aphid populations. For example, aphids experience higher mortality rates during heavy rainfall or high and low temperature extremes. This is because aphids that are exposed on plant surfaces may be dislodged from heavy rain, making them easier to access by predators. And along with this, since most insects are ectotherms, fewer frost days typically aids in the survival of insects over winter. This will allow introduced species to establish permanent populations where aphids are present. One meta-analysis explains that higher precipitation and temperature seasonality also facilitates predator consumption because aphids are usually more sensitive to weather extremes than their natural enemies. Specifically, ground-active predators such as spiders are less likely to be affected by temperature extremes than above-ground herbivores, because fluctuations in temperature are buffered at the soil layer. So predator and parasitoid reproduction and foraging ability will remain the same during extreme weather. However, when implementing biological control programs, it is important to keep in mind that temperature seasonality is more pronounced in the USA than many other countries, so these effects may not be the same. Lastly, I'll talk about future implications and challenges for biological control of aphids in the future. As aphids expand into new areas and outbreaks worsen with rising CO2 levels, it is essential to review the failures and successes of previous biocontrol programs to develop more effective management strategies for a wider range of biomes. One review mentioned that agrochemical companies have a large influence over agricultural practices, and these companies limit the wide-scale adoption of biological control programs. Many areas that are in need of biological control programs also lack policies and regulations to maintain environmental and human safety. Biological control studies are also faced with challenges of money, time, and resources, as insect dispersal and behavior requires longer-term studies over a wider area. So quickly, I'll go over some possible solutions for the challenges biological control faces. Natural enemies control aphids more effectively in grass and herb crops and less effectively in legume crops. With that being said, more research should be conducted in regions with appropriately suited crops in order to get the most benefit out of biological control programs. Many studies also suggest that the best approach for new biological control programs may be through combining multiple agents, such as the use of pathogens with arthropod predators. And most sources agree that better interdisciplinary communication between farmers, policymakers, and consumers will make the basic components of biocontrol programs easier to understand by the general public, and in turn, it will be easier to implement successful programs on a wide-scale basis. So overall, for biological control programs to reach their full potential, proper management should coordinate with policies regarding pesticides, eradication programs, and agricultural development within suitable areas. To accomplish this, more research needs to be dedicated to exploring specific biocontrol agents in regard to their specific aphid species in question, along with conducting longer studies in order to fully understand aphid and natural enemy relationships. And here are my references. All right, thank you guys. Let me know if you have any questions.